Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers, 20+. Viewer discretion is advised. All events are fictional. I never expected a quiet evening at home to twist into something so electric, so dangerously magnetic. He was supposed to be fixing the shower, a simple repair, the kind that usually goes unnoticed. Yet the moment I heard her voice slip through the thin walls, soft and intimate, calling his name, something inside me ignited. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a heat that surprised me. I felt my own restraint falter, a silent craving rising, unstoppable, undeniable. It wasn't supposed to happen. None of it was. But there it was, the tension, thick and humming, like a wire strung taut and ready to snap. I watched him for a long moment, his focus split between her and the task at hand. There was something in the way he moved, the careless confidence, the slight brush of his hand against the edge of the sink, that made my thoughts spiral. My own lips curved with a mix of curiosity and challenge. I could see it in his eyes when he glanced up, brief, fleeting, yet electric. That flicker of recognition, the hesitation, the unspoken words dancing in the space between us. It was dangerous, and yet, irresistibly compelling. The room seemed to shrink around us, the ordinary hum of the shower's dripping water fading into background noise. Every shift, every glance, carried weight. I felt a brush of adrenaline as I stepped closer, the air between us charged. I wasn't supposed to do what my instincts were urging, yet my body betrayed me. The moment stretched, pregnant with tension, a silent question lingering in the room: what would happen if boundaries were tested? How far could desire bend without breaking? I imagined pressing closer, testing the limits of proximity, letting curiosity and forbidden attraction guide my movements. There was a pull I couldn't ignore, a silent understanding that some forces, raw, magnetic, cannot be contained. He didn't need words to tell me he felt it too. It was in the tilt of his head, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes lingered just a heartbeat too long. In that instant, I realized how fragile the veneer of control truly was. And yet, we both held back, circling the edges of something dangerous. The room, once ordinary, had become a stage for unspoken desires, a playground of tension and unacknowledged longing. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears as I imagined the consequences, the thrill of stepping past restraint into a realm that had been uncharted until now. My mind raced, caught between curiosity and guilt, anticipation and fear, drawn irresistibly to the idea of what might unfold next. Then, in one fleeting second, the room seemed to tilt, and the world narrowed to the two of us, the glimmer in his eyes, the silent invitation of a look, the impossible pull of forbidden chemistry. I could feel the air thicken, every subtle movement loaded with meaning. And just as quickly, it ended, leaving me on the edge, suspended between hesitation and the reckless allure of surrender. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that nothing could remain the same after this night. The moment stretched, each second dripping with quiet tension. I leaned against the bathroom counter, pretending to inspect a crack in the tiles, though my eyes were glued to him. He wiped his hands on a rag, and the subtle movement, the brush of his sleeve against his forearm, the way his gaze flicked to me without meeting mine fully, made my chest tighten. We were playing a dangerous game, both of us aware of the pull, yet unwilling to speak it aloud. "Almost done," he said, his voice low but steady. The words were simple, mundane, yet the way they landed in the small space between us made my stomach flutter. There was an intimacy in the ordinary, a private rhythm in how he moved, the quiet focus in his eyes that made me forget for a moment that we weren't supposed to feel this way. I shifted closer, just enough for the air between us to tingle. Our shoulders brushed lightly, and I felt the faintest spark travel across my skin, a silent acknowledgement neither of us dared to name. He didn't pull away. He couldn't. There was a magnetic tension, a conversation in every glance and hesitation, every unspoken word. We stood side by side, fixing a broken pipe that didn't seem broken at all, because the real problem wasn't plumbing, it was us. I wanted to reach out, to touch the back of his hand under the counter, to see if he felt the same surge of forbidden desire. Instead, I let my fingers linger near the edge of the sink, pretending to balance myself, feeling the thrill of proximity. His gaze found mine for just a heartbeat, and the world narrowed again. In that silent exchange, I could feel the weight of unsaid words, the pull of longing wrapped in restraint. There was something both terrifying and exhilarating about how easily the quiet moments became charged. A subtle tilt of his head, the twitch of a smile, the way he adjusted his grip on the wrench, it all carried meaning. I wanted to speak, to break the tension with a casual remark, but my throat tightened. Words would ruin it. Actions, or even near actions, were more potent than any sentence. My heart hammered in the hush of the room, syncing with the faint dripping of the shower and the subtle movements that felt deliberately close, intimate without contact. We moved around each other, careful and cautious, yet each accidental brush, each shared glance, escalated the quiet fire between us. I could sense his hesitation, the internal struggle mirrored in the tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed around the tool. Desire and restraint warred in him as much as they did in me. And yet, there was no resolution, no surrender. Just the heat of proximity, the thrill of something unspoken yet undeniable. I imagined all the ways the tension could break, the stolen glance in the mirror, the lingering presence of our shadows dancing on the tiles. Every small gesture became a statement, every breath a secret we both understood. As he bent down to tighten a pipe under the sink, I felt a rush of anticipation, my body acutely aware of how close we were, of how fragile the line between curiosity and surrender had become. The world outside the bathroom ceased to exist. Only him, only the electricity in the space between us, only the unvoiced question that hovered in the air. How long before restraint gave way to what we both desperately wanted, yet could not yet claim? The bathroom had transformed into something fragile, almost sacred, a place where ordinary routines had become charged with unspoken emotion. I leaned slightly against the counter, pretending to examine a small crack in the tile, though every fiber of me was aware of him. He worked silently, wrench in hand, eyes flicking up occasionally, meeting mine just long enough for a spark to pass between us. That spark was dangerous, and yet irresistible. I could sense him holding back. The faint tightness in his jaw, the subtle hesitation in his movements, these were all mirrors of my own internal struggle. We both wanted the same thing, but the walls we had built around ourselves were strong, built of loyalty, fear, and the quiet knowledge of consequences. I didn't need to speak, I could feel the weight of his restraint in the air between us. Our fingers brushed accidentally, once, twice, while passing tools. Each touch was brief, fleeting, but enough to set my nerves alight. It was a silent conversation, a language neither of us had intended to learn, but one we now spoke fluently. I imagined leaning closer, just enough for our foreheads to nearly touch, imagining the warmth of proximity, yet I held back. He did too. There was a gravity to our longing, something so deep and potent that surrendering too quickly felt almost reckless. I caught a glimpse of him in the mirror, bending down under the sink, his face focused yet soft in the reflection. A sudden pang of curiosity hit me, a question I couldn't voice. What was he thinking? Did he feel the same raw pull I did, or was it just my imagination, tricking me into reading desire where there was only focus? And then his gaze met mine again, a long, searching look that held both caution and temptation. My chest tightened, and I felt my heart accelerate. We moved around each other in a silent rhythm, careful not to overstep, yet each subtle movement thickened the tension. I felt the magnetic charge of proximity, the kind that makes ordinary moments feel electric. A shift in his posture, the way his sleeve brushed his wrist, the tilt of his head, every detail seemed intentional, though I knew it wasn't. It was just us, suspended in that delicate balance between want and restraint. I wanted to reach out. Just a brush of my hand against his, a whisper of contact that would break the dam holding back the flood of desire. Yet I didn't. Because to act too soon would risk everything, our composure, our connection, the fragile, tantalizing intimacy we had cultivated in silence. And I sensed he felt the same, a pulse of hesitation, a moment where his fingers almost lingered longer, almost reached, and then drew back, not out of disinterest, but because he wanted it too much, too urgently, to control. There were secrets between us, invisible walls built long before tonight. My past, his fears, the unspoken boundaries we had agreed upon, these all whispered warnings, reminding us that desire was a luxury we couldn't afford. Yet the closer we came, the less those warnings mattered. Each accidental brush, each lingering gaze, amplified the heat in the room. Every movement, every breath, became a study in restraint, a delicate dance where one false step could unravel the tension entirely. I imagined what it would feel like to let go, to lean in, to bridge the tiny space that separated us. But in that thought, fear intertwined with longing. We were caught in a perfect storm of want and hesitation, each of us teetering on the edge of surrender. And so, we remained suspended, shoulders almost touching, fingers almost brushing, hearts nearly colliding, yet held back by the invisible threads of caution and care. Even in silence, the air was thick with communication. Every glance, every breath, every accidental movement was a message. We were speaking a language of longing, of desire tempered with respect, of passion restrained because we knew it was too volatile to act upon recklessly. And in that silence, I understood something essential. Sometimes, the most profound connections are felt rather than spoken, and the most potent desire is the one held just out of reach. As he straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead, I felt the tension spike once more. We shared a final, lingering look, full of everything we couldn't say, before stepping back into our respective roles, leaving the heat of the moment suspended, unresolved, and utterly consuming. The room seemed smaller now, every corner closing in, every shadow heavy with the weight of what had been unsaid. I could feel the electricity crackling between us, the kind of tension that makes ordinary air feel dense, almost alive. His presence had a gravity, pulling me in, tugging at something deep inside, something I had thought I understood but now realized was far more volatile. He straightened from under the sink, wiping his hands with a rag, and our eyes met again. For a heartbeat, everything outside the bathroom, the dripping shower, the soft hum of pipes, the faint creak of the floorboards, vanished. It was just us, suspended in a fragile, electric silence. I noticed the slight tremor in his jaw, the way his fingers flexed nervously, and I realized we were both balancing on the edge of something we couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore. I stepped a little closer, careful to respect the invisible boundary between us, yet desperate to close the gap just enough to feel the warmth of his nearness. He didn't move away, though I could see the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the internal war raging beneath the surface. The air between us vibrated, charged with longing, unspoken words, and desire restrained by 1,000 reasons we both pretended to honor. A laugh, soft and almost nervous, escaped me. "You make fixing a shower look dangerous," I said, letting my voice linger, carrying more meaning than the sentence itself. His lips twitched in response, a subtle acknowledgement of the electricity that neither of us dared to voice. It was small, almost innocent, yet it carried the weight of everything we had been dancing around. He took a tentative step closer, and I felt the brush of his sleeve against my arm. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but the surge it caused was undeniable. My pulse raced, my breath hitched, and I imagined how it would feel if he didn't pull back. The room was charged with 1,000 possibilities, all of them tantalizing, all of them forbidden. His voice faltered, a whisper of a confession, as if he had begun to say something monumental and then swallowed it whole. The unfinished words hung between us, heavy and electric, echoing in the small space like a secret waiting to be revealed. I leaned just a fraction closer, drawn to the tremor in his tone, the subtle shift in his posture, the invisible thread connecting us that made every nerve in my body sing. We stood like that, inches apart, breaths mingling with the soft hum of the room. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his chest rose slightly with each inhale, mirroring my own rapid breaths. Our eyes held, locked in silent understanding, and I felt the full force of the longing we had contained for so long. The restraint, the anticipation, the impossible desire, it all pressed against us, urgent yet careful, wild yet tentative. My hand moved almost without thought, hovering near his, a whisper of a movement, a near contact that felt like a confession in itself. He didn't move either, the space between us thick with meaning. In that breathless moment, I imagined that we had touched, that our hands had met, that the tension had finally been released. And yet, in reality, nothing had moved. It was the almost, the possibility, the suspended moment that burned hotter than any action could have. Then he exhaled softly, a sound that seemed to carry everything he couldn't say, and the air between us seemed to hum louder, almost tangible. My own breath caught, my body taut with anticipation, my mind alive with every nuance of his presence. The room held us suspended in a perfect storm of emotion, of longing, of heat and hesitation. The world outside did not exist. There was only this near touch, this shared glance, this fragile, electric closeness that left my heart pounding and my mind reeling. And then, silence. Full, heavy, impossible to ignore. It wrapped around us, a cocoon of everything we were feeling but could not yet act upon. It was raw, it was poetic, it was intense, a moment so full of heat that it seemed to crackle like fire in the quiet. And it was only the beginning. The night outside had turned soft and quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in around the house, making every small sound feel magnified. Rain tapped gently against the window, a steady, rhythmic patter that seemed to echo the beating of my own heart. Inside, the bathroom no longer felt ordinary. It was alive with a charged stillness, a suspended magic, and finally, we let ourselves lean into it. I could feel him before I even saw him move. The air between us seemed heavier, thicker, electric, charged with anticipation. Our eyes met, and the world contracted until it was just the two of us. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the slow, deliberate closeness, the unspoken understanding that we were crossing a line we had been circling for too long. He leaned closer first, a whisper of motion that carried the weight of everything we had held back. I closed the fraction of distance left, our shoulders brushing, a small, almost accidental contact that set my senses alight. It wasn't about the touch, it was about the meaning behind it. Her breath melted into his, their shared space became a language all its own. The rain outside seemed to fall harder, drumming on the roof in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It matched the pulse in my veins, the quiet, steady thrum of anticipation that had built between us for weeks. Every glance, every subtle movement, felt like a confession. We didn't need words, our bodies spoke the things we had tried to keep hidden. A shift, a brush of hands, the faint brush of his lips against my temple as he bent to reach for the rag, it was all poetry, an elegant choreography of emotion and desire. I could feel his warmth, the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the way he hesitated before he fully drew closer, as though savoring the moment, committing it to memory before anything else could interrupt it. My own breath caught, slow and deliberate, matching his. Every exhale was a conversation, every heartbeat a shared secret. The room seemed to shimmer in the soft, ambient light, reflections dancing across polished tiles, mirrors, and the curve of shoulders, creating a private, sacred world for us alone. When our hands finally brushed fully, no longer accidental, but intentional, the spark between us flared into something almost tangible. It wasn't just contact, it was recognition, release, confession, and surrender all at once. Our fingers intertwined, tentatively at first, then with quiet certainty, as if the act itself spoke the words we couldn't. I could feel the tremor in him, the same one I had felt mirrored in myself for weeks, a quiet, intense longing finally allowed to breathe. He leaned his forehead against mine, and for the first time, I allowed my eyes to close fully. The rain outside became a lullaby, the only sound other than our synchronized breaths. Every subtle brush of skin, every lingering touch, every heartbeat pressed against another's, it was exquisite. It was intimate without intrusion, erotic without crudity, a moment of pure emotional connection that transcended words. We moved as one in the silence, a careful, deliberate dance of closeness. Our breaths mingled, soft and rhythmic. Our bodies were a language, speaking volumes in touches and glances and the gentle press of shoulders. Each tiny movement was poetry, a hand resting on a hip, a shoulder grazing, a breath shared across a cheek. The night, the rain, the soft lighting, and the quiet intensity of the room wrapped us in a cocoon where nothing else existed. And there we remained, suspended in that perfect, breathtaking tension, finally letting go of every barrier we had built. Every doubt, every hesitation, every restraint dissolved in the simple, quiet communion of presence. It was not about what happened, it was about what was felt, the heat of closeness, the tremor of release, the slow, exquisite unraveling of months of unspoken desire. It was elegant, it was clean, and it was everything. Morning light filtered through the blinds, soft and muted, painting the room in pale gold. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside damp and quiet, but inside, the air was heavy with unspoken emotion. The night's intimacy had left traces, not of bodies, but of hearts, of fragile walls that had crumbled and never quite rebuilt themselves. We didn't speak immediately. Words felt impossible, as though they might shatter the delicate connection we had forged. He sat on the edge of the counter, hands loosely clasped in his lap, staring at the floor. I leaned against the opposite wall, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the sink, tracing lines that felt like the lines of our own story. There was no awkwardness, just a raw, delicate tenderness, the kind that comes after something unspoken has been fully acknowledged. Our breaths were soft, deliberate, each inhale a reminder that we were still here, still tethered to each other, still feeling. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," he said finally, his voice low, uncertain, but not apologetic. It wasn't an apology for the closeness itself, but for the chaos it might have caused in the world outside this room. I shook my head gently, a small, bittersweet smile tugging at my lips. "Neither did I admitted, my voice barely more than a whisper. But it did happen. The truth hung between us, delicate and undeniable. It wasn't a confession of love, not yet, not in the clean, defined way the world demands, but it was something heavier, something deeper. The night had shifted something fundamental between us. The electricity we had circled for weeks was now tempered with awareness, with consequence. We had touched a nerve, and it would never be the same again. There was guilt, too, a soft, creeping shadow that whispered of boundaries crossed, of restraint surrendered. But beneath it, there was also an undeniable peace. The tension that had haunted every glance and accidental brush of skin was now transformed into quiet understanding, into an intimacy that didn't need words. We had seen each other, truly, in a way that defied explanation. I noticed the small details I hadn't before, the way his hair fell slightly over his forehead, the gentle curve of his shoulders, the steady rhythm of his breathing. I realized I wanted to memorize these moments, because they were fleeting, delicate, and entirely ours. He finally looked at me, and the weight of the night reflected in his eyes. "Do you feel different?" he asked, a tremor in his voice betraying the vulnerability behind the words. "Yes," I admitted. "But not in a bad way. Just different." "More," I trailed off, unsure of the language to capture the strange, urgent tenderness between us. "Closer, I think." We laughed quietly, the sound small but grounding, and it felt like a secret shared only between us. The world outside could wait. For now, it was just the two of us, suspended in the morning's golden calm, learning to navigate what had been unleashed. And then, just as we began to find a fragile rhythm, the doorbell rang. Sharp, unexpected, breaking the silence like a stone dropped into still water. We froze, the spell of our morning suspended in a heartbeat. Who could be visiting so early? Our eyes met, wide with sudden apprehension, and in that moment, the fragile thread of secrecy we had nurtured trembled. "I didn't expect anyone," he murmured. "Neither did I replied, moving toward the door with cautious curiosity. The air between us remained charged, heightened by the intrusion of the world outside our bubble. Every step carried the weight of unspoken questions, every heartbeat echoing the tension that had settled so firmly in our chests. When I opened the door, the morning light spilled in, and with it, a twist I hadn't anticipated, a visitor from his past, someone whose presence promised complications, yet also demanded truths we could no longer ignore. My pulse spiked, not from fear, but from the realization that the connection between us had grown too deep to remain hidden, too urgent to be interrupted. The night had ended, yes, but its consequences were just beginning. We stood together in the doorway, the rain-washed world outside gleaming, hearts still tangled in the aftermath of what we had shared. And in that moment, I understood something essential: intimacy, even unspoken, changes everything. It leaves echoes, tremors, and a quiet promise that whatever comes next, nothing could ever be the same. The day had passed into a quiet, golden evening. The rain from the night before had left the world glistening, streets and sidewalks shimmering under the soft light of the sinking sun. Inside, the house was still, each corner holding traces of laughter, tension, and moments too fragile to fully speak aloud. We moved through it with a slow awareness, careful not to disturb what had been built between us, fragile, tentative, yet undeniably real. He stood by the window, watching the last drops of light fade into warm shadows. I approached, each step measured, the silence between us heavy but comforting. Our hands found each other without a word, fingers interlocking like a quiet promise. There was no need for grand gestures. The intimacy had already been claimed in whispers, in glances, in moments too delicate to frame in language. "I'm glad," he said finally, voice low, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. "I'm glad for last night. For this. For us." I felt the tremor in his tone, the vulnerability wrapped around the words. My own heart had echoed the same sentiment all morning, caught between fear and longing. I smiled softly, resting my forehead against his shoulder for a moment, letting the weight of the day, the night, and the nights to come settle between us. "Me too," I whispered. I don't want to pretend anymore. Not with you." It wasn't a declaration shouted into the void, it was quiet, deliberate, like the slow unfurling of a secret flower in sunlight. It was trust, it was surrender, it was the acknowledgement of something both fragile and enduring. Our hearts beat in measured tandem, the rhythm of connection that had been forged in quiet anticipation now fully realized. We moved closer, not in haste, not in desire for action, but in a slow acknowledgement of presence. His hand cupped my cheek lightly, a gentle weight that said more than words could. I leaned in, resting my lips briefly on his forehead, a kiss that carried gratitude, relief, and the unspoken promise that whatever came next, we would navigate it together. The contact was minimal, elegant, intentional. It was the poetry of closeness, not the chaos of passion. For a long moment, we simply existed like that, suspended in the shared warmth of breath, heartbeat, and subtle pressure. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the fragile, beautiful moment contained within these walls. Inside, there was only the soft acceptance of a connection that had survived tension, hesitation, and the intensity of unspoken longing. "I think," he murmured, eyes closing briefly, "I think I've been waiting for this without knowing it." I smiled again, tracing a gentle line across his arm. "We've been waiting for each other," I replied. And in that acknowledgement, everything resolved itself, not with grand declarations, not with fireworks, but in the quiet settling of hearts choosing the same rhythm, the same patience, the same vulnerability. And just as the sun dipped fully below the horizon, casting the room in a warm amber glow, I realized something profound. It wasn't about the night before, or the tension we had danced around for so long. It was about the choice to be present, to be tender, to hold each other without fear. That choice, made quietly, deliberately, was the real climax, the proof that love, or something very close to it, could exist in the spaces between breaths, between glances, and between moments of restraint. We remained like that until the evening softened into night, hearts beating in gentle unison, hands intertwined, foreheads resting together, letting the quiet intimacy speak the words our lips didn't need to form. The story had not ended in spectacle, but in substance, a slow, warm closure that left goosebumps along the spine and tears threatening at the corners of eyes. And as we finally moved toward the door, ready to step into a world outside the fragile cocoon of that room, the memory of our journey lingered, unspoken, unforgettable, like a perfume that refused to fade. It was elegant, it was respectful, it was real, and it was ours.